This is an introduction video where we will discuss hazmat in general, the various types of hazardous materials, some of the various definitions regarding hazmat and what type of training is required for hazmat employers and hazmat employees. We will also go into some of the resources that are available regarding hazmat that are right at your fingertips. Some of the easy resources that exist when watching and learning during this video include web pages and various compliance books. Everything is online. People learn and retain information better in different ways. If you're better with a computer, then the web might be perfect for you. If you're better with a book, then there are a couple options. Let's start with the PHMSA website, which stands for Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. In here, you can find all of the regulations, all of the charts that you will see over the series of videos, and all of the definitions can also be found. A complete online ERG guidebook, which we'll get into greater detail in later videos, is also online. If you're more of a book person, the Hazmat Compliance Pocketbook is a great tool that most truck drivers use. However, it is missing some details that are available online, or you can go with a more complete book. I have this one and I'm a big fan of it. One of the downsides of the Compliance Pocketbook is it doesn't have packaging requirements listed in the hazmat table found at 172.101. Nor does it have limited quantity exception information or the vessel stowage information. The upside is it does have the placard spelled out in great detail in here. That information is not on the online chart. I can't tell you what's best for you. If you're managing an operation of hazmat personnel, the big book to me is a great resource. If you're dealing with hazmat on an irregular basis, the web and or a compliance pocketbook can easily get the job done. The key to success with hazardous materials training is knowing how to look it up. Nothing you will learn about hazardous materials needs to be from memory, other than remembering how to look it up. If you are using the Compliance Pocketbook to follow along, there is a table of contents that tells you what page goes with what information. You can use little tabs on the right as a quick guide to find it. If you're using the web, I have included some links that you can click on to get you into the regulations. We are starting with definitions that are very basic that go with hazardous materials. Hazmat is defined as a hazardous material is a substance or material which has been determined by the Secretary of Transportation to be capable of posing an unreasonable risk to health, safety, and property when transported in commerce, and which has been so designated. This includes hazardous wastes, marine pollutants, and elevated temperature materials. Anyone who deals with hazardous materials on a regular basis can grow numb to the dangers associated with hazmat. It's important, just like driving a car, to pay attention to the details so you don't have a problem. As all hazmats were determined to be hazardous materials because the Secretary of Transportation determined they pose an unreasonable risk to health, safety, and property when transported. Sure, some hazmats are more dangerous than others, but they all have a risk associated. It's important to understand what sort of risks and how to mitigate them. A hazmat employer means a person who uses one or more employees in connection with transporting hazmat in commerce, causing hazmat to be transported or shipped in commerce, representing, marking, certifying, selling, offering, reconditioning, testing, repairing, or modifying packages qualified for use in the transportation of hazmat. And who needs hazmat training? Anyone who is employed by a hazmat employer and who in the course of employment directly affects hazardous materials transportation safety. This could include a loader, unloader, someone who handles hazmat, someone who tests, reconditions, repairs, or modifies packaging as qualified for hazmat. If you prepare hazmat for transportation, if you're responsible for the safety or transporting of hazmat, if you're putting the bill of lading together with the hazmat information, or if you're entering the hazmat information on a website for some purpose, odds are you fall into the hazmat employee category. Training needs to be recurrent and done every 3 years. Training should be completed within 90 days of the first day of employment or the first day of a change in job function. Until training is completed, a hazmat employee must be directly supervised by a person who has been trained. There are 5 types of training. General awareness training, which is getting you familiar with the general requirements of hazmat and enables the hazmat employee to recognize and identify hazmat. Then there's function-specific training, which is more training specifically to the functions of your job, what you do as part of the hazmat. It's going to be different for someone who, say, chooses the packaging for a hazmat versus someone who is dispatching a driver or the driver himself. Safety training, which is the third type, is training that covers the hazards presented by hazmat, safe handling, emergency response information, methods and procedures for accident avoidance. All hazmat employees must receive this training. The next is security awareness training, which is training that provides a general understanding of the security risks associated with hazmat transportation and the methods designed to enhance transportation security. This should include how to recognize and respond to possible security threats. Then there's in-depth security training. It's training that provides a detailed understanding of a company's security plan, including their objectives, what to do if they believe there's a breach happening. This training must be provided to those who handle or perform regulated functions related to the transportation of the materials covered by the security plan, or those who are responsible for implementing the security plan. The last thing is maintaining a record. You do want a record that someone has completed their hazmat training, and that should include a certificate with some specific requirements like the employee's name, most recent training completion date, a description, reference to how they were trained, what materials were used, name and address of the person providing the training, and a certificate that the person has been trained and tested as required. So with that, you also want to create and have a test that is difficult enough to show that the hazmat employee does have understanding. The purpose of hazmat training should always be for your personnel to have a robust understanding of what they're dealing with so they're able to deal with it. So the testing and retesting is very important, and it's good to know it's a 3-year minimum retraining. You can do it more often, and it should be done if there is a misunderstanding of the hazmat regulations. Now we're going to move into the 9 classes of hazmat. The first we're going to start with is explosives, Class 1. When you're looking at explosives, an explosive means, and this is according to 173.50 if you're following along, an explosive means any substance or article including a device which is designed to function by explosion, i.e. an extremely rapid release of gas and heat, or which, by chemical reaction within itself, is able to function in a similar manner, even if not designed to function by explosion. Unless the substance or article is otherwise classed under this provision of this subchapter, the term includes a pyrotechnic substance or article, unless the substance or article is otherwise classed under the provisions of this subchapter. And then they range in type from Division 1.1 to Division 1.6. 1.1 being mass explosion hazards, one which could infect almost the entire load instantly, and 1.6 being sort of the least of the dangers of the Division 1, consists of extremely insensitive articles that do not have a mass explosion hazard. So you've got a big difference between 1.1 and 1.6, but they're all dangerous. But some common examples of explosives would include ammunition, fireworks, fuses, black powder, dynamite, or torpedoes. Now we move on to Class 2 hazmat, which is Division 2.1 is the first. There are 3 classes of Class 2. Division 2.1 is flammable gas, and that's gas that lights on fire at 65 degrees Fahrenheit or less, or 20 degrees Celsius or less. Some examples of Class 2.1 flammable gas include hydrogen, propane, and methane. Division 2.2 is non-flammable, non-poisonous, compressed gas, which means any mixture which exerts in the package at greater than 68 degrees Fahrenheit and does not meet the definition of a 2.1 or a 2.3. Some examples of that would include nitrogen, carbon dioxide, compressed or liquefied, and oxygen. Division 2.3, gas poisonous by inhalation, is gas which is known to be toxic to humans as to pose a hazard to health during transportation. Examples of toxic gases would include ammonia, acid sulfate, cyanide acid, methyl bromide, sulfur dioxide, and carbon monoxide. Now we move on to Class 3, which is flammable liquids. For the purpose of this, a flammable liquid means a liquid having a flash point of not more than 140 degrees Fahrenheit, or any material in a liquid phase with a flash point at or above 100 degrees Fahrenheit that is intentionally heated and offered for transport, or transported at or above its flash point in a bulk packaging. Combustible liquid is the other type of Class 3, and a combustible means any liquid that does not meet the definition of any other hazard class specified in the Class 3 definitions and has a flash point above 140 degrees Fahrenheit and below 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Some examples of Class 3 flammable liquids would include petroleum or acetone. That leads us to Class 4. And there are a few subsets. 4.1 flammable solids are readily combustible or may contribute to a fire through friction. These include flammable solids, self-reactive substances, or solid desensitized explosives. Then there's 4.2, spontaneously combustible materials, also called substances liable to spontaneous combustion, are liable to spontaneous generation of heat during transportation, which can then lead to a fire. These include pyrophoric substances and self-heating substances. The last, dangerous when wet, 4.3, is water reactive. These are substances which emit a flammable gas when in contact with water. A very common example of a Class 4 flammable solid would be matches. Class 5 brings us to oxidizers, which are materials that can start and support a fire through the chemical reaction of oxidation. Organic peroxides are separated out because they provide everything necessary for fire in one chemical. There are two subsets of the class. The first, 5.1, are oxidizers. They're a material that may generally, by yielding oxygen, cause or enhance the combustion of other materials. Then there's 5.2 organic peroxide, which is any organic compound containing oxygen in the bivalent structure and which may be considered a derivative of hydrogen peroxide, where one or more of the hydrogen atoms have been replaced by organic radicals, unless any of the following applies. If it meets the definition of an explosive, it's not an organic peroxide. If it's forbidden per transport, or it does not pose a hazard as a 5.2 material. That leads us to Class 6 poison. The first, 6.1, a material other than a gas which is known to be so toxic to humans to afford a hazard to health during transport. There's also the Table 1 version, which is an inhalation hazard, which carries a whole bunch of liability and different things that are required. But we'll get into Table 1 and Table 2 in a later video. Examples of Class 6 poison would include pesticides or tear gas. Class 6.2, infectious substances. This is a material known as reasonably expected to contain a pathogen. A pathogen is a microorganism including bacteria, viruses, parasites, and fungi or other agent, such as an infectious particle prion, that can cause disease in humans or animals. That brings us to Class 7. Hazard Class 7 is radioactive material, and that is any material that contains unstable isotopes of an element undergoing decay and emitting radiation. A great example of this would be uranium, and contrary to popular belief, no one has been known to get superpowers from radiation exposure. Public alert, no superpowers from your radioactive material. That brings us to Class 8, corrosive. And in this, corrosive material means a liquid or solid that causes irreversible damage to human skin at the site of contact within a specified period of time. A liquid or a solid which may become liquid during transportation that has a severe corrosion rate on steel or aluminum based on the criteria found in 173.137 C2 is also a corrosive material. An example of some corrosive materials that are common include batteries, battery acid. Different paints are often classified as corrosive materials. And now we move on to Class 9. And what the Class 9 definition says is miscellaneous hazardous material, Class 9, means a material which presents a hazard during transportation, but which does not meet the definition of any other hazard class. So essentially, this is a catch-all for anything that wasn't covered in the first 8 classes that could still possibly present a hazard during transportation. Some examples include dry ice, any battery-powered vehicles or equipment, first aid kits, or airbags.